Welcome, welcome. I can think of no better way to kick things off here at Bloomberg Invest by bringing together one of the biggest banks in the world and can I call you a startup still?
I think we are no longer a startup.
You're no longer a startup.
You can say scale up, I guess.
Okay, scale up. Mistral AI's Marjorie, Janiewicz, and Shobhit's here as well from Citi. It's a great pairing, and I think the biggest thing that I've been thinking about in preparing for this is the different conversation that we're going to have this year versus what we had last year. I was told to be ready for how quickly AI is going to improve, how quickly things will get better. I mean, we talk weeks, we talk months, and it has absolutely blown my mind. So I just want to start out with you, Shobhit. You're relatively new to the position at Citi as global head of AI. How does the bank use AI right now?
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. For us at Citi, AI is the very core of how we serve our customers, how we empower our colleagues, how we run our business. So it's just across the fabric of what we do. And we always have to do that with making sure we have safety, compliance, and responsible innovation always at the forefront of what we do. We have a two-pronged approach to how we apply AI across the firm, bottoms up, top down. So bottoms up is about making sure we empower all of our colleagues. We have a central AI platform that gives you access to all kinds of large language models, contextualized to the backend systems that we need to connect to, presets that help you do the workflows.
So how does that work? Like you have the more than 180,000 employees who have access to this at Citi, have this sort of central hub where they can just go and access AI tools.
So 180,000 colleagues use these very, very actively. And we've rolled this out to 84 countries. Like Citi is a very large company. We are physically in 94 countries. We operate in 180 countries. So it's a very, very large landscape. And all of our colleagues have built out a lot of day-to-day workflows in our Citi Stylus tools. So this is empowering them to do day-to-day job much, much faster, better, improves our safety, improves the way we look at different workflows. So that empowerment helps us go bottoms up and address all kinds of workflows. Then there are certain workflows that are very top-down. So we've taken a very robust approach of looking at top-down processes that cut across the organization. So we recently went through with 50 of such high-impact workflows across the firm. So things like KYC, AML, it could be client onboarding, it could be loan processing, things of that nature that are cutting across the firm. Those need to be radically reimagined. It's not just layering AI on top. It is looking at that process, simplifying, eliminating some workflows. There are policies in place that impact them. So we're doing a lot to reimagine how Citi operates in the core processes, right? Top down, all of that is built on a central platform, common capabilities. So now we're empowering our colleagues from both day-to-day as well as for the more end-to-end processes.
Okay, so big picture overview. We're going to dig into sort of a few use case examples a little later. Marjorie, I want to bring you in here because if Mistral's already working with many big banks around the world, including some here in the United States, but in Europe, HSBC, BNP Paribas, when you are speaking to the folks who are actually buying your product, you're working with them to essentially build it from the ground up for them. What are the problems that you are able to solve for them?
Yeah, actually it ties very nicely to what you just described. I think when Mistral started the business 2 years ago, we were an open source model-only company.
Not a startup, even though 2 years old.
So we were a model-only company, and we started to talk to a lot of banks and financial services companies globally, and we realized that this bottom-up adoption was absolutely great, but it wasn't necessarily sufficient to drive deep transformation across a bank. So some of the problems were when you start talking about a very complex KYC process or claim management in insurance, you start realizing that you need to tap into the full enterprise context, to the full enterprise data in order for that process to work well. So we started to work with a lot of customers that were trying to combine their cloud data with their on-prem data to make those workflows be fully transformed. And then we also realized that creating such a complex or transforming such a complex workflow requires quite a bit of an advanced set of tools that are going to help you inject governance at every step of those workflows. So the main problem we realized was that the ROI across those banks were limited by the access to the full context of the enterprise, on-prem data, cloud data, the ability and the need to customize the workflows to be really specific to the regulatory requirements that were needed.
Was that challenge, and has that challenge been just about the fact that as these banks have existed for many years, as these financial institutions have existed for many years, they've adopted new technology. That technology has been layered on top of each other. So you have, some data that's housed here, some data that's housed here. Is that what it's about? Is it about taking a lot of old data or old systems and modernizing them? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's a little bit that, but there's also not all data can be necessarily exposed to the cloud. Many institutions need that data, some of that data to remain really on-prem for data privacy and data control perspective. And then you start also having a network of software, newer software, but also older software that all need to be connected back into those AI systems for those workflows to be truly transformed. And at times we go all the way to requiring the models themselves to be fully customized to the data itself for the ROI of those systems to be fully realized. So we spend quite a bit of time helping companies customize and fine-tune their models for the ROI to be realized, really. Yeah.
Shobhit, one thing I'm really interested to hear from you about is how you scale technology like this, because again, I'll go back to that number, 180,000. It's not like you gather everybody in a room and you take them through, hey, this is how you're going to use this technology. And the technology also changes very quickly. You approve things at a certain rate in certain countries based on what regulators there allow. How do you scale this across an organization?
See, it has to come from within. Right? It has to be something that people want because it is transforming the way they do work. So just in the last year, we had over 21 million interactions with our Citi AI tools. That tells us how people are using it. We can constantly look at feedback loops and get better.
Are those productive interactions? Because I have a lot of unproductive interactions with AI tools.
A variety of things. I generally get surprised. And the interactions that we're having are not single one-time chats. Our Citi Stylus tools are fairly sophisticated in the kind of workflows we allow people to do. As an example, I have about 5,000 users who have access to agents inside of our Stylus, so I can give an overall ask. It creates a plan. The human approves the plan. It's like, yes, it makes sense. It can go into all kinds of backend systems that are Citi's proprietary, bring all of that back and go through the whole process. And these are fairly long interactions that go through the agentic loops, right? So you're getting a lot of work done in a few minutes, right? One level up from there, it's not just a one-on-one interaction with AI, it's a community. So we have something called Stylus Spaces where I can have my colleagues and AI as part of the conversation, and all of this is happening simultaneously. So while we're having interaction with AI, I can tag with a colleague, I can tag another colleague, another AI, they're also participating, right? So this is generally changing the way work gets done. Now, in order to infuse this across the firm, you don't learn by going to town halls or looking at online courses and stuff like that, right? What we have been very successful doing is our AI accelerators and champions program. So we went out and we have people across the firm in every line of business. There's legal, there's marketing, there's developers, and the whole spectrum. These 4,000 people are the ones who are creating day-to-day presets. They're showing their colleagues. So you learn from the person who's next to you on the desk. And when they show you how they're leveraging AI to accomplish a lot more, you learn a lot faster. So you can share a preset. You have all these. This week we're doing a Citi AI days. We've done more than 100 AI days across. We've covered the entire globe. So when you get the community together, when you're learning from each other, and the tools are advanced enough that they are embedded in the way we do work. It's not a generic third-party tool that we're leveraging. We know exactly what kind of workflows are needed, and there's a continuous feedback mechanism. That bottoms up, making sure that the skills are there. We mandated generative AI training. We want to make sure that everybody's empowered. They know how to use these tools, and they're seeing how their peers are using these tools, right? That has had a compounding interest on how well we've had diffusion of this technology across our...
Yeah, the peers element, I think, is really interesting. Like hearing from colleagues that, okay, this is what I was able to do. That helps me, at least, with the adoption, is like hearing people who are doing my job, but a little differently, using AI. Marjorie, when you're working with the banks and you deploy Mistral's tools for them, what do you hear back from them about what they were able to accomplish, what they were able to do that they weren't able to do before, how much money they're saving, if they're saving money, that ROI. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I think maybe to also quickly supplement on what my colleague said, I think there's the bottom-up adoption side of things, but there's also, when we start speaking about horizontal use cases, those use cases that are really cross the bank, those use cases that are going to be very much workflow oriented, I think this is where the top-down approach is necessary. And what has changed, I think, over the past 2 or 3 years is that you used to be able to solely rely on IT to roll out those end-to-end cross-functional processes into the bank. Today, the same way you need to expose your end users to AI, you also need to expose the business into participating, into defining what those processes are going to look like in the future. So my point is the role of the business together with IT is absolutely essential in driving those horizontal projects. And then going straight into responding to your question, I think within banks we see really 3 types of major use cases. One is customer 360, so onboarding the customers, improving the customer experience. And here you start being able to measure ROI with attach rate or customer acquisitions. That's an example of a ROI metric that you can tie directly back into AI systems. The second part is all around risk and control. So your KYC process, your anti-money laundering process, there you're going to be able to measure ROI in efficiency quite a bit because you are, of course, making your employees more productive. And then the third type of use cases are usually linked to financial intelligence. And here, financial intelligence is getting access to the right data faster to make the better decisions. And here you can measure the return in efficiency, but also cost savings or risk reductions. So when we start working on those horizontal projects with the business and with IT, it is absolutely essential from the beginning to identify what those measurements of success are going to be so that you avoid the proof of concept graveyard that we've all been speaking about.
How do you avoid that at Citi? What do you make sure to measure when you deploy something or when you're using a new tool or thinking about using a new tool?
So for us, applying AI as a technology, in order to get business value out of it, you have to genuinely look at the operating model and AI together. You need to look at the process itself. So I'll give you some very quick examples of how we think about this. If you ask a process owner, can you do this a bit better? Everybody can squeeze out 10% on their own, right? They don't need external help to come explain how this is done and then you tell them how to do it better and stuff, right? They have a handle on that because they have control over the process itself. If you need to automate a document, they can handle it themselves. Technology is available today to do that. If you change the exam question and you say, why does this document exist in the first place? That is upstream, downstream workflows. There are policies across the firm that are impacting that particular process. The process owner, our job as leaders, is to empower that process owner to radically reimagine things that are out of their control, right? That's what we're doing at Citi. Every Friday, we have the entire leadership team getting together as joint accountability for AI across the firm. This is leaders of every business, every functional area.
You're saying, so what you're saying is adopting AI makes you think differently about the entire process flow of an individual's job. Like, you know, if we think about this in a historical context, maybe it's like, you know, people used to come in the morning and the mail cart would come around and bring you documents in the morning and drop newspapers off. And then nobody had computers on their desks. Now they have computers on their desks. They are already reading their email on their way into work. Are you talking about a transformation such as that?
So I'm talking about fundamentally reimagining the process end to end. It's not about automating an existing process, right? So you don't want to have AI layered on top, right? So to give you an example, if you are looking at, say, the process owner, if you're doing onboarding of a client, it is not a reading a document with AI problem. It's not a problem of optical character reader. Can I read this with higher accuracy? It's a cross-border data sharing problem. To enable that process owner, every Friday when we meet as a leadership, we are unlocking some of these hurdles that come in the way of systemically being able to transform things, right? So you look at a process, you simplify it, you eliminate some steps, right? And then you start to automate what's remaining. So it's a new way of doing things. And I'll give you a very simple human analogy. When we got dishwashers in our houses, we don't expect the dishwasher to stand up and rinse dishes the way humans do, right? Instead, we have added a step of loading the dishwasher, taken out the next 5-10 steps. The way dishwasher washes dishes is radically different than what humans do. The output is a lot better, and without dishwashers, we couldn't have massive restaurants, right? So that mind shift is needed. So you need to empower the process owner. It's not a technology problem alone. It is understanding the process, re-engineering the process, enabling those people to see what the future state looks like, and then committing to an outcome for that.
Marjorie, come on in. I wasn't expecting the conversation to be so cultural as far as as far as work goes in the workplace and understanding the way people work, but I saw you nodding your head.
I totally agree. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, when we started to work on some initial use cases, we would take a process that had already been documented, and we started to work on basically deploying AI on that process. Big mistake. The first step is to think about how does the process need to be completely transformed in the world of AI. And it's not only a technology problem, it's also an understanding of a domain problem, which is why we even deploy forward deployment engineers that have both AI expertise and also domain expertise in order to be able to completely revamp what the process is.
So Marjorie, what's the right way to think about that? Do you only think about the outcome, what you want to achieve, and then you completely rethink how to get there using new tools?
You start with the outcome in mind.
Okay.
Of course, you need to understand the ecosystem, the tools, the data sets that's available, but you start with the outcome in mind, and you start rethinking. Of course, you need AI knowledge to do that, but you start rethinking in an ideal world to achieve that end an outcome. How do I need to completely rethink the way I've been doing my work in order to be more efficient?
So we got a lot of people watching right now. We have a lot of people in the audience here in New York City who work in the finance industry, who've been doing a job a certain way for many years. What's your advice to them?
I mean, the big advice to me, depending on where you are in your journey, is to start with the most impactful problems that you need to solve as the first set of use cases. So a lot of companies have tried to make some quick wins along the way or attaching to some exciting projects, but those projects were not tied to a very big customer outcome. So what's an example of that? You know, if you're trying to basically decrease, failure rate of your KYC process, and it's going to result in X million dollars of saving, that's an iconic use case. That's a use case that's going to have a big impact. Start there and really have IT and the business work together. One without the other, I think, is just not going to work.
I agree, 100%. It has to be a joint accountability across the firm. There's certain use cases that are where AI has done an amazing job for a lot of our banks. Software development, right? We have about 30,000 software developers across Citi. We have rolled out agentic coding tools. There's a software development lifecycle that is very mature for us, and we're infusing AI agents to help us with that whole process end to end. Just between just with the coding tools itself, we have unlocked about 100,000 hours a week of incremental productivity for our developers. So imagine how much more we can build out in terms of features for our customers, delighting them with experiences, making the bank safer, better guardrails, things of that nature, right? So we're using that 100,000 hours a week towards those.
I was just thinking working less, but...
No, there's so much to be done, right?
It doesn't sound like that's the idea.
There's we've done about 1.5 million code reviews fully automated. Right? So this is helping us make sure that the code that we're producing is a higher quality, it is safer, we're able to get to our backlogs much faster. You start to see that roll out over time, right? Similarly, every area that we have gone out and done this at, you look at KYC, AML, you look at KYC, for example, we've mentioned that a few times, know your customer. For a bank like us who operates in 180 countries, we move about $2,000 trillion a year. So you can imagine the kind of checks and balances we need when we're onboarding a customer, looking at the entire end-to-end. When somebody's coming for a loan from us, we need to look at the entire company, the book of work, the transactions, right? So step by step, there's a lot of unstructured content. If you're looking at anti-money laundering, an investigation comes to you, there's a lot of, you look at these breadcrumbs and start connecting the dots, right? So you start to channel your inner Sherlock Holmes and say, hey, I see something here, let me double click. Oh, this is a shell company who was on the particular board. Do they do transactions here and stuff? You start to put together a picture. So we're automating a lot of that workflow. It's unstructured in nature, and we're able to go after a lot more. So by the time it comes to a subject matter expert, they have a very clear view of what the case is. And the same exact view can then apply to supervising the conversations we're having with end customers, or looking at fraud detection and stuff like that. So all these different use cases, we're seeing good 30 to 50% of the workflows are very quickly automated, as long as there's a human in the loop to validate this going the right way.
Shobhit mentioned software engineering, and I think that's a good way to segue in the last few minutes that we have to really understanding from you, Marjorie. I think a lot of people in this room have a good understanding of ChatGPT, of Anthropic's Claude, but maybe not where Mistral and Mistral's and what it does for finance falls in there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can definitely do that, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said also a moment ago. I think when you start speaking about banks that are 100 years old, that have acquired a lot of data for many years, suddenly the data that the bank has becomes a competitive advantage if you can customize your models to that data. So we're speaking about customer 360 and creating unique customer experiences. What if you were able to inject that proprietary data into your AI systems? Suddenly the AI you've built for your end customers is very differentiated to other banks globally. So we've been speaking about cost reduction for the past 20 minutes or so, but there's also a revenue generating aspects to that for the banks. So to answer your question, really what Mistral has been focused on over the past couple of years is really three things. We believe first in open weight models. So the large language models that Mistral has launched over the past couple of years are open weights. It means you can completely adapt those models, you can look under the hood, and if you can adapt them, you can customize them to your business. So really openness is the first point. The second point is we specialize in really helping banks deploy those systems on-prem. As well as in the cloud, so that you're not only, I would say, narrowed down to use cases where your data is in the cloud, but you can really take your entire data set and build those AI systems safely and with full control. And the third aspect is customization, making the AI your own, not only by customizing the models, but also a technology platform that you can plug and play into those model gardens or those platforms you've built internally. So Mistral has basically built an entire business over the past couple of years, working with companies like HSBC and BNP, as you mentioned, really working on enterprise-wide transformations. We start by laying out a horizontal strategy for what that transformation looks like. We define 30, 50 critical use cases that are going to either drive new revenue opportunities or drive significant efficiency gains, and we achieve that with 25 different open models, a technology stack that sits on top, and the very important component of forward deployment engineers that I was talking about, that are the glue between technology and AI expertise, but also domain expertise. So folks that understand KYC, folks that understand anti-money laundering processes, people that understand deeply customer 360 in the context of a bank, and we roll out those end-to-end solutions to really drive return on investments.
Shobhit, is that when you adopt a frontier model, is that the way it goes?
Yeah, so the way we've done this in Citi, we have a Citi AI platform. That's the only way you get to any LLM.
Like built on an LLM?
No, so the platform itself exposes all sorts of partner LLMs for us. We have to have a very, very scalable, the scale at which we are is very large. We need to make sure it's multi-model. We need to make sure it's multi-cloud. We need to make sure it's super simple to tack into. And all the governance has to be baked into the platform from the design, right? So for us, we have our own benchmarks of figuring out what models are suited for what kind of use cases, and we can keep running them. Models change every few weeks, every few days, months. We need to make sure that we can run all of our tests and come up with our own scoring against one of them. So we have intentionally made sure that we can swap models in and out. Our moat comes from the context of the business, like context engineering, and ensuring it understands how we need it to be done in a particular way. When AI is making some content, we need to make sure the checking of the content is also automated. There should be human in the loop looking at all of that end to end. So we've looked at this end to end, ensuring that we can pick and choose from the best partners we partner with. The models are just so competitive. The pace of intelligence is so rapid. We want to make sure that we're able to partner and bring that intelligence to the fingertips of all of our colleagues, as well as all the big use cases. We're doing a lot to make sure we have common capabilities that are built out. We should not have each group across the company go partner with different vendors to go do document comparison. One central place on where we do this, that capability gets better and better as new models come in, as our partners innovate more. But you have one central place. So then I can have one place to make better, one place to govern, one place to approve. So from a risk standpoint, it makes a lot more sense to do it centrally and have a multi-model strategy around it.
We unfortunately have to wrap it there. I got through like 2 of my note cards, unfortunately, but there's a lot more we could talk about. I want to thank everybody for listening and watching here and getting in touch with us, and then everybody also who's watching at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg terminal. A big thank you, Marjorie and Shobhit.
Both.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Have a good morning, everyone.